Hey guys, so this is a little quick video. Some people were asking me, they told me they were interested in the P-10C, but they heard about all these little issues and kind of what to look for if they're looking at one in a gun store. So a little background, when CZ noticed a problem with a part or something, they would make the change in the factory, but unfortunately there's no way to know by serial number or manufacture date if your particular model has the newer part or the older part. They didn't really track any of that. It's almost like they had a bin full of parts, and then they realized that they had to make a revision. They made new parts with the revision, and then just threw them in the same bin as the old stuff. Because there are newer guns coming with older parts. There are older guns that don't have the older parts in them. It's kind of a mixed bag. So really, the only way to know is to get your hands on one and either look inside or take one apart and examine everything. So. These are some of the things that I've kind of seen over the past 6 months, and after seeing what the resolution is from CZ, and you can see whether or not it's a big deal and whether or not something you want to avoid. So the first one is magazines that weren't dropping free. What would happen is a person would press the magazine release button, and the magazine would pop down to about here, and it would just stick, and they'd have to pull it out manually. Neither of mine do it, but the reason for it is this part of the mag catch. So the way it works is this little angled part here just hooks into this slot, and that's what holds it in place. So when you press in on the magazine release button, this rotates down and it releases. What's happening is due to some frame tolerances or just some variations in the mag, there are some people where they'll press the magazine button and this bottom portion will actually rotate forward far enough to touch the magazine. And if there's enough contact, it'll actually, as the mag's coming out, snag on this little hole right here. And so the magazine would come down about 1/2 inch and then just stick. So you can examine the magazine in the store, like just take a magazine and just insert it and release it like 10 times. And look for a wear mark here, going from about here all the way up to here. Like that little one is fine. What you don't want to see is this wear mark sliding all the way up to the hole, because that means that this is contacting and it's snagging a bit. For guns that are affected by this, that are sent to CZ, what CZ will do is basically just file off the fending metal here and send it back. So if you look at it, I don't know if you can see it, I'm going to try to get it to focus. You can see that little horseshoe? There's a little ledge here. That little edge there is what could snag on the hole in the magazine. So what they'll do is they'll just file that completely flat. So, if you see that and you don't feel like sending it in or whatever, that's just one thing you can look out for. Another thing that was reported was magazine buttons that were just really hard to press. They come rough from the factory. So the roughness in the trigger, roughness in the slide release, roughness in the mag release. CZ coats all their internals with this like black oxide. It's almost like parkerizing, and it's not very hard. It's pretty soft, but it takes a couple hundred rounds or so to kind of wear off. So if it's rough, but you can press the button in with one thumb, that will smooth out. Like this one's pretty smooth now. If, however, you feel like you need 2 thumbs to get the magazine out, then that may not smooth itself out. One thing to be aware is that because of the magazine catch design, that as it rotates back, it also pushes up on the magazine a little bit. So I don't know if you can see it, but as I press the button in, see how the gap closes just a little bit, and when I release it, you can see it open back up. So as I push the button, the magazine's pressing up into the gun, and it's fighting the spring pressure. So, if it's rough, that's fine, but if it's heavy, you might want to pass on that. Same thing with the slide stop. The slide stop should not be overly difficult to release from either side. It should be identical. If you need 2 thumbs, that may not smooth out. From what I understand, some have a different angle cut here in the back of the slide release, right there. So that kind of affects how it drops. So that'd be one thing to check out. Another thing to look out for, and I think pretty much all of them do this, is, I have to turn up my exposure here, is contact between the top of the trigger bar here, see the part that's moving, and the bottom of this locking block here. So in both of mine, it was making contact and actually gouging this part, and the same on the other side, right here. And it was making enough contact to where when I put in my HPI trigger, the trigger wouldn't reset. So when I took everything apart, I looked at this locking block and there was just all these gouges in it. So I actually took a Dremel and ground a little bit of the corner off. And apparently, if you have this issue and you send it to CZ, they're going to do the same thing. They will literally just grind off the bottom corners until it doesn't make contact. So it may already be ground actually from CZ. That was one of the things that they did to take care of that. So just look for any contact there. What will happen is you can see, if you see like a sliver of metal where it's kind of getting contacted, then you'll know that it's doing that. The other more infamous one is this one popped up on a video where the striker, the guy was able to push the striker over to like where this punch is right now. And what it would do is once you got the striker over enough, so the striker is normally right here, and it would rotate over. Oh, dang it, hold on, let me get focused here. It would rotate over and snag like that on the back of this section of the rail. Neither of mine do that. No matter how much I push it over, it doesn't come over enough. But apparently the striker design in some allows it to come over, and I don't know if it's ever happened under recoil. If it has, I've never seen it happen. No one I've asked has seen it happen, but you know, it's one of those things that I guess could happen. It's not outside the realm of possibility. But basically the check is just see if you can push the striker over to the right as you're facing the bottom. The other thing to look for is the slide plate. So the slide plate is different. Now the newer ones are different. So here's this is actually an aluminum one from CZ Custom, but it's the exact same profile as a factory one. When you look at it, you can see that there's an angle cut right here in the center leg, and everything else here is 90 degrees, 90 degrees, 90 degrees. So what was happening was the slide plate is kind of loose. You can see it just kind of moving around. And if the slide plate comes down far enough, these edges would catch somewhere on the back here. And so you'd end up with the gun kind of just stuck like that. And if you rack the slide hard enough or just kind of push up on the slide, it would go forward. So CZ came out with a slightly revised version where all three of these legs have an angled cut in them, and it's pretty good. It's almost like shaped about like that. I don't have one on hand. I actually just took both of mine. One of them I just shortened everything. This one I actually, you can see the angles that I cut into it. I just threw it on a mill, put it at 45 degrees, and just shaved it all the way across, so that if it does somehow drop down far enough to snag, it'll just get pushed up by that angle. So look for an angled cut right here. And I wish my camera would focus a little better. So I think that's about it as far as stuff you can look out for. Oh, another thing that was popping up, and I think I've got some pictures of it. People were seeing frame cracks. So underneath this metal part, there's a little thin plastic shelf, and I'll show a picture of it, where it's cracked. And it's because the roll pin is a little bit fat, and that section is a little bit too thin. And it's really consistent. Like almost, I want to say every other CZ owner that I've had take one apart and take a look at has said that they see the cracks, and they're in the exact same spot in the exact same angle. So it's pretty kind of alarming to see cracks in the frame. So I showed it to an engineer at work, and he's an aerospace type guy. He builds race car engines and understands metallurgy and all that stuff. And he basically said it's not pleasant. I'm not happy it's there, but it's not really going to hurt the gun. The important part of the frame is obviously this thick portion. That thin portion is so thin, it doesn't really do anything to keep the gun together. All the recoil forces, when they hit this piece, push down and back. The only thing this does is prevent it from lifting up because the takedown spring is under pressure. But other than that, it really doesn't do much other than hold it, just keep it in place. All the forces are directed against big chunks of plastic back here that are molded for this piece. So the cracks that are forming in that little section aren't that big a deal. I'm not happy that they're there. It's kind of like if you buy a really nice car and then the hood doesn't line up perfectly with the rest of the body. It's not going to hurt the car, doesn't hurt the performance at all, but it doesn't leave you feeling warm and fuzzy about it. So, yeah, it's just kind of one of those things. I mean, if you never take your gun apart, you'll never know they were there. But, you know, the minute you switch out your trigger or do some polishing or something, more than likely you'll see them at some point. There are some guys, one guy took a brand new gun that had never been fired other than at the factory, took everything apart to Cerakote it, and you could see the cracks in there. So, unfortunately, you can't see if yours has those or not from the outside. I don't think a gun store owner is going to let you take the whole thing apart, but even if you have them, they're not that big a deal as far as function goes. But if something like that does bother you, then you may need to pass. Oh, one more thing to look for. So this spring here, oh man, the lighting is not good in here today. So this spring here, it looks like a little shepherd's hook. It comes down and around like that. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to show it. And you can't really see it on this one. Let me see if you can see it on my black one. All right, you can see a little better on this one. Right there. So you can see some of the spring protruding. If you can see any little bit of that spring, it may not be an issue, but I would look for one where I can't see that spring at all. I don't want to be able to see this. And the reason is, if you can see that spring, there's a chance that during disassembly or at some point, if the frame flexes out just a hair, that spring can pop up, and it actually sticks up like this. And once that pops up, you can't get your slide off. What happens is, because that's sticking up, it actually grabs right here on this little portion. It grabs right here on the disconnector lug, and you cannot get your slide off. I mean, you could brute force it off, which probably damage something. The only way to get it off is to use like a butter knife, or I used a 20 thousandths feeler gauge for a buddy of mine, and just stick it in there and slide it back and push that spring down, and then you can get the slide off. So if you can see any little bit of that, I'd find one where that doesn't happen. And that's just a frame tolerance issue. I mean, you've got plastic frames, and there's just always going to be some variance there. So my black one hasn't been an issue in over 4,000 rounds, but you know, why risk it, right? Some people have said that they don't like the fact that they can see a gap in the gun. So when I turn, you can see a heck of a gap there. That's not a big deal. Pretty much every striker-fired gun is like that. The reason you can't see that in the Glock is because there's a recoil spring going right where this area is. On the M&P, they actually put a little tiny shelf of plastic in there to kind of block it off. But yeah, don't worry, that's nothing. That's just totally normal. So, incidentally, second slide, back from JagerWorks, identical to the first one. Still haven't gotten an RMR for it, waiting for something to go on sale, maybe one of those Cabela's deals. And yeah, so, oh, and my magazine button is at JagerWorks, getting nitrided to match, so I'm just kind of sitting here without it until it gets back. Anyway, so yeah, that's where we're at with the P-10C as far as stuff to look for if you're going to go buy one. Some people are not going to want to, probably after seeing this video, and be like, you know, I'm going to buy a gun that doesn't have those issues. Maybe I'll get a Glock or an M&P or something, but it is an excellent handgun, so if you can find a good one, and I'm not saying the others are bad, but, you know, if you don't want, I mean, no one wants to deal with issues, right? So if you do like one, you know, keep an eye out for those things, and if you find one that doesn't have all that stuff, you'll be really happy. So anyway, I'll see you guys later.